You did everything that was asked of you today. You showed up on time. You tracked the conversation. You remembered the thing you were supposed to remember. You held your face in the right expression during the meeting that went 40 minutes too long. And from the outside, from every outside, you looked like someone who has it under control. It is now 9 p.m. and you have nothing left. Not for the things that still need doing. Not for the people who need something from you tonight. Not even for yourself. For the version of you that might want something or rest or just a few minutes that don't cost anything. And the part that makes this hardest to carry isn't the exhaustion itself. It's that you cannot explain it to anyone because from the outside, nothing happened today. You were fine. You are always fine. That's the problem. This video is about what fine actually costs. Not in general, not theoretically. The specific, itemized cost, the one nobody has ever sat down and added up for you. By the end of this, the exhaustion you've been carrying without a legitimate explanation will have one. There's a good chance that somewhere along the way, someone used the words high functioning about you. Maybe it was a diagnosis qualifier. Maybe it was a teacher saying you were bright but inconsistent. Maybe it was a therapist who, after listening carefully, said something like, "But you're managing so well." And maybe, in the moment, it felt like a compliment. Here is what high functioning actually meant in practice for most of the women who received that label. It meant you didn't qualify, not for the extra time, not for the classroom support, not for the accommodation at work, not for the specific kind of help that might have actually changed something, because you were functioning, you were showing up, you were producing, you were, by every external metric, someone who did not need intervention. What no one asked, what the label made it structurally impossible to ask, was, at what cost? Functioning at what expense? Producing by running what down? Showing up by taking from where? The high-functioning label didn't measure your well-being. It measured your output. And it used the output to conclude that the internal experience didn't need to be looked at. That's not a small error. That's the mechanism by which decades of genuine suffering got filed under doing fine. It makes complete sense that you learned, eventually, to file it there yourself. When every system around you looks at the output and calls it evidence that you're okay, you start to use the output as your own evidence too. And the exhaustion underneath it becomes something you carry alone, in the gap between what you produce and what it actually takes to produce it. That gap has a name, and it has a cost. And that cost has been running, quietly, for years. Let's talk about what that cost actually looks like when you add it all up. Here's what the research on ADHD and cognitive compensation consistently shows. The brain with ADHD doesn't automate what the neurotypical brain automates. Executive function, the capacity to initiate, organize, monitor, and complete tasks, is not a background process for the ADHD brain. It is a foreground process. It is conscious. It is effortful. It is expensive. Which means that every time you walked into a meeting and appeared organized, you were generating that organization manually. Every time you tracked a conversation while also monitoring your own body language, managing the social calculation of when to speak, suppressing the 4 things that almost came out of your mouth, that was not one task. That was 4 tasks, running simultaneously, consuming working memory you were also supposed to be using for the actual content of the meeting. And meetings are just one item on the ledger. There's the overhead of time management, the constant conscious effort to track time in a brain where time does not move intuitively. The checking, the rechecking, the setting of 3 alarms because 1 alarm is a wish, not a system. There's the overhead of emotional regulation, the work of containing the reaction that the ADHD brain generates faster and more intensely than the situation calls for. The breath, the pause, the decision not to say the thing, done 40 times a day, every day. For 30 years. There's the overhead of social translation, the real-time monitoring of whether you're coming across correctly. Too much? Too little? Too intense? Did that land wrong? Reading every face in the room while trying to say the words in the right order? There's the overhead of error checking, the hypervigilance that developed because you learned early that your brain would miss things, so you built a surveillance system to catch what it dropped. Running constantly. Never fully off. Add those together, not as a list of symptoms, as a daily expenditure. And then ask the question the high-functioning label never asked. What is left at the end of a day of running all of that? The answer is what you already know. The answer is what you're sitting with at 9 p.m. when the coffee is cold and there is nothing left. Now we need to look at what running that system year after year actually costs. The exhaustion is not weakness. The exhaustion is not poor stress management. The exhaustion is not a sign that you need to build better habits or stronger discipline or a more consistent routine. The exhaustion is a completely predictable output of a system running at 300% on hardware that was never designed for this load. And here is the part that takes a moment to land, so let it land. The fact that you sustained it as long as you did is not evidence that it was fine. It is evidence that you are extraordinarily resourceful. Those are not the same sentence. One of them has been used against you your entire life, to close doors, to deny support, to conclude that you didn't need what you needed. The other one is actually true. Now consider what sustained output at that cost does over time. To the body, the chronic stress load of sustained hypervigilance has a physical signature. The sleep that doesn't restore. The tension that lives in the jaw, the shoulders, the chest. The immune system running slightly compromised because the nervous system never fully comes down. To the relationships, the people who needed you present in the evenings after the overhead had already taken everything. The partner who experienced you as distant, the children who got the performance of patience instead of the actual presence. The friendships that quietly dissolved because you had nothing left to maintain them with. To the identity. The slow, steady erosion of knowing who you are beneath the performance. Because when the mask has been on long enough, and it has been necessary long enough, it becomes difficult to locate where the mask ends and where you begin. And then, and this is the part that carries the most weight, the whole structure gets attributed to character. Not to overhead, not to compensation, not to a brain running a system it was never designed to run. To character, lazy, inconsistent, difficult, oversensitive, not living up to potential. That attribution became the framework through which you understood yourself. So the cost of high-functioning ADHD is not just exhaustion, it is exhaustion, plus the theft of the correct explanation, plus the installation of the wrong one in its place. That is what the high-functioning label cost. That is what nobody added up. That is what this video is witnessing. If what you just heard resonates, not just as an idea but as a history, there's a structured process in the description called the Masking Cost Audit. It's 5 guided sessions that do exactly what this video did, but for your specific life. It names the cost, it puts it somewhere you can actually see it, and it begins the process of converting what you've been carrying as shame into something much closer to legitimate grief, which is a completely different weight to hold. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So what happens when you finally see the real bill? None of this is an instruction to stop functioning. That's not what's being offered here. And it wouldn't be honest to offer it, because the functioning is often not optional. The job exists, the children exist, the life exists. What changes is something more internal than that. And it is not small. What changes is the account you keep. Right now, the account you keep says, I should be able to do this. Other people do this without it costing anything. The fact that it's costing this much means something is wrong with me. That account is inaccurate. Not because the difficulty isn't real, it is completely real. But because it's measuring your output against a baseline that doesn't account for the overhead. It's like measuring a runner's time without noting that she ran the whole race carrying twice the weight of everyone else. The time looks slow. The account says, not good enough. The account is wrong. Here is what an accurate account says. You generated executive function manually in a brain that doesn't produce it automatically every day for decades. You maintained the social performance, the emotional containment, the error-checking surveillance, the time management systems. On top of whatever the actual work was, you did this without support, without accommodation, and without a correct explanation for why it cost what it cost. And you are still here, which is not a small thing. Not when you understand what still here actually required. The internal objection worth naming directly. Maybe this is all just a way of explaining away a low tolerance for normal difficulty. Here is the answer to that. Normal difficulty doesn't produce this specific exhaustion. Normal difficulty doesn't leave you unable to explain why a Tuesday with nothing extraordinary in it cost you everything you had. The overhead is real. It shows up in the research. It shows up in the bodies of women who spent decades compensating at this level. It shows up in you tonight at 9 p.m. holding a cold cup of coffee with nothing left. That is not low tolerance. That is an accurate reading of an accurate cost. And what becomes possible when you hold it that way, when the exhaustion has a legitimate account behind it, is not a sudden relief from the difficulty. It's something quieter than that. It's the end of using the exhaustion as evidence against yourself, which means the energy that was going into the case against you becomes available for something else, not a transformation, not a before and after, just less weight on a weight that was already heavy enough. If this opens something you want to go further with, the masking cost audit is in the description. It's where this conversation continues, at the level of your specific history. What was the moment you first realized that high functioning had been used to close a door on you rather than open one? There are years in this you won't get back. The jobs where you over-delivered until you collapsed, and no one ever knew what the delivery actually cost. The relationships where you showed up as the competent one, the one who handles things, while quietly running on nothing. The appointments you didn't make, the help you didn't ask for because every external signal told you that you were managing fine, and managing fine meant you didn't qualify. Knowing this doesn't return those years. But it does change what they mean. They were not proof of your limitations. They were not evidence of a character flaw that no amount of effort could correct. They were the completely predictable cost of navigating a world designed for a different brain, without a map, without support, and with the wrong explanation installed in the place where the right one should have been. The exhaustion was always legitimate. The cost was always real. The account was always there. It just wasn't being kept correctly. It makes complete sense that you couldn't explain it. You were given the wrong language for it. This is the beginning of the right language. Not a fix. Not a solution. Not a before and after. A translation of 3 decades of unexplained depletion into something that finally has an accurate name. The label was never a compliment. It was a measure of how well you hid what it cost. And the fact that you hid it so well for so long, that is not weakness dressed up as strength. That is strength that was never called by its right name. Not evidence, navigation. She was never the problem. Neither are you.